Review. Rose, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Shall we start in a couple of minutes?
Yes, sir.
Jaison sir is here.
So, good evening, everyone. Now, let's move on to the 8th session of our webinar on Sugar Ray Robinson. It would be taken by Dr. Jaison P. Jacob, Head of the Department of English, DEVA College. So, I invite Donna Maria to say a few words on Dr. Jaison P. Jacob. Donna.
Thank you, Rose. With great pride and honor, I am here to introduce to you the man of the hour whom we choose to be the speaker for today's occasion. Our distinguished speaker belongs to an illustrious clan of teachers, educators, and academic professionals. He applied his extensive knowledge on cultural studies and post-colonial studies. He has published around 7 research papers. Among his more significant achievements are his translations of Grimm's fairy tale, Jungle Tales, and a compilation of papers presented in the national seminars. He has also edited the work Ezhuthinte Vazhigal in 2019. I have the honor to introduce our very prolific and generous speaker, who is the head of the Department of English at DEVA College, KURAVILANGAD, Dr. Jaison P. Jacob. He is here to introduce Sugar Ray Robinson, the greatest boxer of all time. Without further delay, please join me in welcoming Dr. Jaison P. Jacob. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Donna. So good afternoon, everybody. I thank Subin sir for asking me to present Sugar Ray Robinson before you. And when we speak about Sugar Ray Robinson, he was a boxer. He was a boxing sensation, not a writer. He was not a writer, not a critic, not a theorist, but a person who shone on the rings. A boxing sensation of the 40s and 50s he was. And I will now introduce him in a very brief manner. It will be a very short session compared to other sessions. And I hope at the end of the session, you will make your own contributions to add on to what I have said, or what I am going to say here. So here are some pictures of Robinson here. He is in the boxing dress, boxing gear, and now hitting. And this is a different picture, a fashionable young man, dazzlingly beautiful, attractive, fashionable. There is another facet of his personality, because he was not a boxer alone, he was a celebrity also. A fashionable person who was very much popular in the social circles of his times, and a very successful entrepreneur, businessman all. So there is another facet, and this picture is a representation of that facet of his personality. And now I will give some details of his. He was a boxing sensation of 40s and 50s. His actual name was Walker Smith Jr. He was born on 3 May 1921, died on 12 April 1989, committed from 1940 to 1965. That is the prime time, 1940 to 1965. And he was introduced into International Boxing Hall of Fame in 1990. And when we speak about his boxing bout, Robinson turned professional in 1940 at the age of 19. From 1941 to 1951, he had an unbeaten series of 91 matches. It is the third largest in the history of professional boxing. He was the world welterweight champion from 1946 to 1951 and also bagged the world middleweight title later. He retired in 1952 and tried his hand on singing and dancing. Though he was a good entertainer, he was not a success in that career. So he returned to the ring 2.5 years later and continued his earlier feats. He was the boxer who for the first time won a divisional world championship 5 times. Robinson was named Fighter of the Year twice in 1942 and 1951. He was ranked number 1 in the Ring magazine's list of 80 best fighters of the last 80 years. There is an introduction about his boxing career. And okay, this is a look. We can look at the achievements he has made. So overall, 201 fights he had, and 174 fights he won, and 19 losses there were. And he won by knockout 109 matches by knockout, and he lost only 1 by knockout. So that shows he was a very powerful boxer, an outstanding one, a very difficult one to defeat. And these are some of the books written on him, some biographical works, being Sugar Ray, The Life of Sugar Ray Robinson, America's Greatest Boxer and First Celebrity Athlete, by Kenneth L. Shropshire. Then Sweet Thunder, The Life and Time of Sugar Ray Robinson by Will Haygood. And I will quote a few lines from these books about Robinson. And this part mainly focuses on his performance outside the ring. An account by Kenneth Shropshire. I quote, "He had a real presence in the neighborhood I grew up. You would see him on variety shows, Ed Sullivan, Mike Douglas, that kind of stuff. He had a whole routine, and then they would show his old boxing clips, so I knew how good he was." Shropshire goes on to say that Robinson was the first African-American athlete to become successful as an entrepreneur and a celebrity. That is what I told you earlier. The importance of Robinson is that he was successful in 2 fields. One, that of boxing, and the other as an entrepreneur. Especially at that time, the Black Americans, the African Americans were not coming forward and becoming successful. They were doing little jobs and all. And he was one of the first successful Black Americans we have in the history of Black Americans. And he continues to quote, he basically owned an entire city block in Harlem. He had Sugar Ray's restaurant, a bar, a barber shop, Edna May's lingerie for his wife, real estate business, all of this stuff in early 1950s. So such a successful person he was. And he continues to say that Sugar Ray Robinson was a great inspiration for later athletes like Muhammad Ali. Many young boxers were influenced by Sugar Ray Robinson and his success. Again, his lifestyle, he had a very flamboyant life. He always traveled in a pink Cadillac in the company of friends. He also had a charity organization known as Sugar Ray Robinson Youth Foundation. So a versatile personality he was. He also had clear stand on color discriminations. To cite an example, he had the practice of traveling with his friend Joe Louis and entertaining people with boxing during the years of the Second World War. Very often, he was asked to box before segregated audience, that means a white-only audience, because color discrimination was very powerful in those days, and he was often asked to perform before white-only audiences, but he refused. He always refused. He insisted that he will perform only before a mixed audience, an integrated audience. And he also was a supporter of the civil rights movement. So he was not a mere boxer, a versatile personality he was, having a role that he had to play in various aspects of life, touching various aspects of life. And now the question is, where are we going to fix him culturally? So I have told you how he is a boxer, a successful boxer, and how he was a person who had played other roles than that of a boxer, how he had a very large acceptance even among the white people, white section of the people, and how he became an icon of how he became an American icon. And the next question is where we are going to place him culturally. I think he can be called a product of the Harlem Renaissance. That is the cultural context where we can place him. The context of Harlem Renaissance. See, Haywood in his biography says, the progressive and dynamic atmosphere of the Harlem Renaissance shaped Robinson. And you know what Harlem Renaissance is? We can have a cultural and a historic approach to Harlem Renaissance. Speaking historically, Harlem Renaissance can be traced back to the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863. So with the Emancipation Proclamation, the Negroes of the southern states of America, especially southern states, became free. They lost the shackles on their arms and they became free. And then they started moving from their places, from their fixed places, from their farms, where they had to live in the shadows of the white population. So they began to come out of the farms. The elder generation did not move. They were set in their own ways. But the younger generation, they moved north and freedom. And this migration continued for a long time, so many decades, and it became most prominent and vibrant during the first decades of the 20th century. Especially in 1920s and 1930s, there was a very prominent activity in the northern cities of or the cities of the northern states of America. The Negro population increased very much. The presence was very much felt in those places. And the formation began not the formation of a black middle class, an African American middle class in cities like Harlem, New York, and many other cities of the northern states. And you must be familiar with jazz and blues, the typically African American song. Many jazz troops were there. Many literary figures were there. On the slide, you can see some names. So the first few names are that of writers: Zora Neale Hurston, Langston Hughes, Sterling Brown, Wallace Thurman, and then we have Louis Armstrong, singers. Louis Armstrong, Alberta Hunter, Bessie Smith, Ma Rainey, Clara Smith, Cap Galloway, Duke Ellington, Chick Webb, Jimmy Lunsford, Florence Mill. So these are all singers, and they were part of so many bands, jazz bands. And the streets of Harlem overflow with these people and their vibrant activity. So that was one of the remarkable things that we can speak about Harlem Renaissance. It is a renaissance in the field of thinking, writing, singing, dancing, socialization, education, entrepreneurship, everything. So many middle class Negroes or so many middle class African Americans, they took up new enterprises, started business. So this activity was there. It was intellectual, artistic, cultural, and all. So this is what we call the Harlem Renaissance, and it actually gave the African Americans an identity. So earlier, during the days of slavery, they were living unknown. They were living in oblivion. There were artists among them, there were singers among them, but their art and their talents did not come out. They always lay hidden within the shadows of slavery. And once this opportunity was given to them, they flocked the cities of northern states, and they began to express themselves. They began to evolve an identity of their own. They began to be seen. So they came to visibility. So this is the most important thing we have to speak about a Harlem movement. The Harlem movement, the Harlem Renaissance, it gave visibility to the African American people. It gave them voice. It gave them an opportunity to form themselves as an independent entity and argue for their rights in a white dominant society. There were oppositions. There were many gangs which tried to quench the energy of this movement, but still it was there. It was very prominent, and we had political persons like Marcus Garvey and Back to Africa movement, all these things. So politically, culturally, literally, artistically, all a resurrection was there, a renaissance was there, a rebirth, a rejuvenation was there. This is what marks Harlem Renaissance. So we can place Robinson, Sugar Ray Robinson, in the context of the Harlem Renaissance. So he was not an artist, but he was a boxer and a celebrity. So with his extraordinarily outstanding boxing bouts, he attracted people and their respect and their admiration. And outside the ring, he became very successful as a businessman and an entrepreneur. And he was one of the first Black Americans who was accepted by the whites as their equals. So he was invited to their parties, and there was no any difference shown to them, no any kind of discrimination he had to suffer from the white community. So this is very important, especially when we think of America as a place marked by color discriminations. So through boxing, he tried to project the image of the blacks. So we can say that boxing becomes a political activity in his case. He made boxing a political activity. That is the most important thing we have to remember. All these names you see on the slide, they were also making their activities political, because writing has a politics, singing has a politics, dancing has a politics. How? Because through writing, they are making their voice heard. Through writing, they are shaping their own identities. Through writing, they are fighting against the white supremacy. Through singing, they are fighting against the white supremacy. They are carving out their own space, and it is a political act. So just like all these figures like Zora Neale Hurston, Langston Hughes, Ma Rainey, Clara Smith were carving out their own space and a space for their own community in the white dominant American context, and creating a political act, doing a political act. Robinson also, Sugar Ray Robinson also was doing the same thing, and to a certain extent, to a greater extent, I think. This is his importance, I think. He increased the visibility of the blacks, the visibility of the African Americans in the American context, in the white dominant American context. And by doing that, he made his profession a political act. And that is what I want to say. And I think you have got some idea about Sugar Ray Robinson and the role he played in the American society. And there ends my presentation. And I invite you to come forward with your own contributions. I think many of you will be capable of making additions to what I have said.
Thank you, sir. If there are any queries, participants can ask now.
Thank you, Jaison sir, for this wonderful presentation. One second. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Jaison sir, for that wonderful session. So, I thought of having something to add to what he has said. Martin Luther King, after Martin Luther King's speech, and in sports, you had Jesse Owens beating Lislong, that is from Germany. And actually, you have Lislong, you have Jesse Owens, and Sugar Ray Robinson. They are, contemporaries. But the place that Sugar Ray Robinson, actually that he earned the name Sugar Ray, had in the context of Afro-Americans, especially when they come forward to a better life. Actually, it was after Sugar Ray Robinson's contributions, especially financial contributions, especially the social, cultural milieu of America. What he has done has, given the Afro-Americans a better position in the US and also in the world. Till that time, you remember, if you look at history, history, the African continent were called the Black continent, and also treated as people who were not having any history or not having any rights. But Sugar Ray Robinson, with his sports and his attempts in business, and actually when he did his business in the initial stages, there were a lot of drawbacks, and he had faced a lot of financial loss in the initial stages. And later, the hotel business in which he endeavored made him, well known, and he became one of the richest men in the US. So that was how the Afro-Americans got accepted in America. So you have two things there. One, earlier there were people like Martin Luther King or Abraham Lincoln who were speaking for the rights of the Afro-Americans. They were actually limited. They were given only an outer space outside the circle of the whites. But Sugar Ray Robinson earned a space within or among the whites, and there was the space, the creation of space. Right? Edward Soja talks about the spatial politics, and if you want to apply that spatial politics into Afro-Americans' life, it is the one place, it's the first place where you can use this politics of space. And Sugar Ray Robinson was a person who used this politics of space, the creation of space. Once the space is denied to you, you create your own space. That is the third space, right? Which was earlier said. So this is the contribution that Sugar Ray had made into the lives of Afro-Americans. And thank you, Jaison sir.
Thank you.
So others can contribute.
And this man was very much loved by the people. So the sugar was not there in his name. Actually, his name was something else. And it was during one of the performances that he got that name, Ray Robinson. Ray Robinson was another person. During one of his under 19 performances, he did not have a chance to perform. He did not have the card to perform. Then a boy having the name Ray Robinson did not come. So he entered the ring using that card, and he won the game. And that name he took for himself. He was awarded his first trophy under another person's name, Ray Robinson, and he made it his own name. And later, once after witnessing his performance, somebody from the audience called out, "He is as sweet as sugar," and that is from that moment that he was started to be called Sugar Ray Robinson. So a very popular person, very much loved by the people, liked by the audience, and very fashionable also, and very romantic and very charismatic personality he was. So in his biography, it is written like this: women swooned at him and men tried to imitate his style. So a multi-faceted personality he was. His personality had so many sides, not a single side that of a boxer, but he was a boxer, a singer, a dancer. And after boxing, he entered the field of singing and dancing. And after 2.5 years, he returned to boxing because he did not become a success there. But still, he had that ability. He entertained people. So he was an entertainer. So a multifaceted personality, a very talented person. Such persons are rare in history, and especially among blacks, because they were often discriminated and denied many chances. So he was a person who overcame all the limitations and restraints that society had exerted upon him. Because if you look at his earlier life, he was having a very bad childhood. His father left him. His mother, he was born in Georgia. His father left him and his mother took him to New York. And very hardships he had to undergo. And in school, he had to suffer much. And it is overcoming all these hindrances and problems, hurdles that he achieved. He made such achievements and became the darling of the people all over America. And it is after all these problems that he became known as the American icon. And he was a celebrity, and all the magazines competed to publish his photographs and news. So a special kind of podium he has in the American culture, in the African American culture. And as I told you earlier, we can rightly place him culturally in the context of the Harlem Renaissance. Okay. If there are no more questions, we can wind up. Rose, Adya.
Thank you, sir. That was indeed a fruitful lecture on Sugar Ray Robinson. Thank you for your time.
Okay, then thank you. Tomorrow we start at 10 o'clock. Okay, thank you.